Edwin Arlington Robinson, Life in Poetry. Edwin was a very skilled poet, and he was very good at what he did. He was a highly respected man. Um, his presentation contains me and my group members, Chris Curran and Ryan Heron.
Some of his early life and influences were he was born December 22nd in 1869 in Headtine, Maine. He was the third son of a wealthy merchant family. His father discouraged his literacy ambitions. Rich Robinson's early works were rejected. This shaped his sense of failure, influenced by the loss of his mother and two brothers to illness.
So Edwin was very educated. He attended one of the most pristine schools in the world, Harvard University, for 4 years. Although he did not end up graduating, he was unsuccessful. He experienced rejection in his early years of poetry, but that's how he worked through and pushed and learned from his mistakes. And then eventually he published poems in student journals and local magazines to gain some traction and kickstart his career. And Harvard helped to build or shape his intellectual development, but the rejection from peers left him feeling isolated. So he kind of had a depressing childhood, and it pushed him to do better.
Edwin went through a lot of career as well as personal struggles as well. He ended up moving to New York where he struggled with poverty and alcoholism. This took a big toll because his writing was him expressing himself, and his personal struggles were reflected through his writing. So works were largely ignored or rejected, contributing to his feeling of failure, which could have affected his alcoholism, using alcohol as an outlet. And in 1904, Theodore Roosevelt helped secure a government job with giving Robinson financial stability. And this period allowed Robinson to continue writing while working at the customs house. So this was definitely like a turn for better in his life. Things started to go for him a little bit better.
So the influence of nature and religionism. Robinson's work is deeply tied to New England landscape, especially Maine, where he grew up, his hometown. Tilbury Town was a fictional town. It serves as a backdrop for many of his poems. So the setting of many poems took place there. Robinson also focused a lot on small town life, personal failure, and isolation. This is most likely due to the way he grew up, because he was reflecting on himself, which had a lot to do with his failures and isolation as a kid. And the nature of his poems, or in his poems, is bleak and symbolizes the harshness of life. So he's trying to express the darkness behind life itself, basically.
Now we're going to talk about his literary style. He had traditional forms. He largely rejected free verse. He had a laconic style, which uses direct and spare language that evokes complex emotions. So his writing was pretty straightforward and direct. There wasn't too much like extra words that he would use to like express his emotions. He would often focus on character. He delves into the psychology of his characters. His characters would help him express his emotions, and which is why he would take a deep dive into the psychology of each character in his poems. And the common themes of his writings were failure, isolation, and existential struggles, which, as we know, through his personal struggles was what he was going through a lot. So that's what he tended to write about a lot.
So, themes, failure, and isolation. Many of Robinson's characters struggle with personal failure or alienation. This is due to his childhood, how he grew up. Again, he went through it himself. He was neglected as a child because his father didn't approve of his interests or his passion. He commonly talks about loneliness tied to social isolation and emotional detachment. There's a common theme here about just isolation and loneliness, again, because that's just how he grew up. And he reflects on the psychological toll of unfulfilled dreams, and probably because his dad wanted to push him in a different direction, which would have caused him to not follow his dreams himself. And his poem suggests that failure will happen eventually, and it's an intrinsic part of the human condition.
Now we're going to look at one of the poems that he wrote called The House on the Hill. The theme of the poem was like feeling a decay and abandonment and the passage of time, which is something he's reflecting. He could feel like he likely felt abandoned and like he was just there, like just, and time was just passing him. The tone was melodic and reflective and nostalgic. This is reflective because it's how he was feeling on the inside, and the passage of time just like shows how he's reflecting on each day, like just feeling abandoned. And the house represents the inevitable decay of life and human endeavors. Imagery, descriptions of nature overtaking the structure symbolize life's inevitable decline. So, yeah, just him reflecting on how he's feeling and using the house as a way to express himself and his emotions as like inevitable decline and abandonment that he's feeling.
So I'm going to read an excerpt from The House on the Hill to help give a better understanding on what we're talking about his writing style. It goes, "They are all gone away, and the house stands alone. The outside is decayed, and the windows are cold. There's no sound or song or light."
Here there's a picture of the house that like you could imagine that the house would probably look like, and the imagery and symbolism in the poem, the decay of the house symbolizes the decay of life and human achievements. Like basically the house at some point was an achievement, and as more time goes on it just decays, like as it does in human life as well. The cold and silent house represents emotional isolation, which is likely what the author was feeling. And nature overtaking the house reflects the inevitability of time and death. And the house as a symbol of failed dreams and passage of history. Yeah.
So the influence of that classical literature had on Edwin, he was influenced by many Greek and Latin forms of literature, It's just always been an interest of his, although it doesn't have very much connection to a lot of his work about isolation. References to classical mythology can be seen in his work, such as in Tristram, and his formal, structured verse mirrors the classical tradition, and his work shares themes of fate, human condition, and the struggle for meaning. So, just back to the loneliness, isolation sort of theme that he always tends to talk about.
Now we can talk about some of the awards and recognition that he gathered throughout his career. First is the Pulitzer Prize, which he won in 1921. And he won this for the poems that he wrote. You can see a picture of it on the screen right now. He also won a second Pulitzer Prize in 1924 for the poem he wrote, The Man Who Died Twice. Robinson's work were praised for in traditional forms of psychological death. People praised his work because he used poems as a good way to express emotions and for other people to relate and feel a sense of security knowing that they're not like the only people going through that if they're reading that. And he was widely regarded as one of the foremost poets of his time.
And that's it. Thank you very much.